The air in the mountain estate was thin and smelled of expensive pine and old secrets. Maya sat across from Julian at a table that felt a mile long, the candlelight flickering between them like a dying heartbeat. Julian was a man who collected things, rare watches, vintage cars, and, as Maya had painfully realized, people. He had brought her here under the guise of a reconciliation, retreat, a chance to mend a marriage that had become a gilded cage. But Maya knew the truth. She had found the documents. She knew he had signed her name to a series of fraudulent offshore transfers. He wasn't trying to save their marriage. He was preparing her to be his scapegoat. He needed her isolated, compliant, and eventually gone. Julian sipped his wine, his eyes never leaving hers. He had a way of looking at her that made her feel like a painting he was deciding whether to keep or auction off. He told her she looked beautiful, but the compliment felt like a threat. He began to talk about their future. A future where they would move to a private island, away from the noise of her family and her career. It was a classic move, total isolation. He didn't know that Maya had already seen the blueprints of this house. She knew that the smart home system he bragged about was actually a high-tech surveillance web. Every room was a microphone, every mirror a lens. When dinner ended, Julian stood up and walked behind her, placing his heavy hands on her shoulders. He leaned down and whispered that he had a surprise for her in the library. As they walked through the marble halls, Maya felt the weight of the burner phone strapped to her inner thigh. It was her only link to the world outside, a world that currently thought she was on a blissful vacation. Julian opened the library doors to reveal a stunning collection of first editions, but the centerpiece was a massive, floor-to-ceiling glass case containing a single ancient dagger. He told her it was a gift, a symbol of their sharp new beginning. Maya smiled, a cold, practiced tilt of her lips. She knew the glass was reinforced and that the room was soundproof. This was where he intended to keep her while he finalized the paperwork that would frame her for his crimes. As the days turned into a week, the psychological pressure intensified. Julian began to gaslight her, moving her things, telling her she had said things she hadn't, and subtly suggesting that her mind was failing. He wanted her to doubt her own reality, so that when the police eventually came, she would appear unstable. But Maya was playing a deeper game. Every night when Julian thought she was asleep, drugged by the tea he insisted on making, she was actually wide awake. She had switched his sedative with a mild herbal supplement weeks ago. While he slept, she used his own laptop, which she had mirrored using a keystroke logger months prior. She wasn't just watching him. She was rewriting his digital life. She discovered he wasn't just framing her. He was planning to disappear entirely, leaving a trail of breadcrumbs that led directly to her and a non-existent lover. He had even forged emails between Maya and a mysterious... As Maya sat in the dark of the library, the blue light of the screen reflecting in her eyes, and began to redirect the flow of the evidence. She didn't delete his forgeries. She enhanced them. She added metadata that linked the S character back to Julian's own secret alias. She turned his trap into a circle that pointed back to the center. The turning point came on a Tuesday. Julian announced that his lawyers were coming the next morning to update their wills. Maya knew this was the endgame. Once she signed those papers, her life was forfeit. That evening, Julian was particularly buoyant, opening a bottle of champagne. He toasted to loyalty. Maya toasted to clarity. She watched as he drank deeply, unaware that she had introduced a trace amount of a paralytic, not enough to kill him, but enough to slow his reaction time. As the sun dipped below the jagged mountain peaks, the house's security system suddenly went into lockdown mode. The heavy steel shutters over the windows slammed shut. The doors hissed as the magnetic locks engaged. Julian frowned, checking his phone. Glitch in the system, he muttered. He tried to override it, but his biometric scan was rejected. He tried again, his thumb pressing harder against the glass. Access denied, a cool, synthesized voice echoed through the hallway. Julian's face paled. He looked at Maya, who was calmly sitting on the sofa, a tablet in her hand. What did you do? He hissed, his voice trembling as the drug began to dull his motor skills. Maya didn't look up from the screen. She told him that she hadn't done anything he hadn't planned himself. She had simply moved the timeline up. She showed him the screen. His bank accounts were being emptied in real time, the funds being transferred not to her, but to the very victims of his previous financial scams. The S persona he had created to frame her was currently logging in from his personal IP address. confessing to everything in a pre-scheduled email to the FBI. Julian tried to lung for her, but his legs gave out, and he collapsed onto the Persian rug. He looked up at her, his eyes wide with a mix of fury and terror. He realized then that he had never been the cat. He had always been the mouse. Maya stood up, looming over him. She told him that the safety of the house was now his prison. The lawyers wouldn't be coming tomorrow. The authorities would. And they wouldn't be coming for a frail, confused wife. They would be coming for a man who had accidentally locked himself in his own vault, with all the evidence of his crimes displayed on the screens around him. She walked toward the hidden service exit. A passage Julian had forgotten existed in his arrogance. Before she left, she turned back one last time. She told him that the most dangerous thing you can do to a person who has nothing left to lose is to give them a reason to watch you. She had watched him for years, learning his patterns, his fears, and his ego. She had used his own tools to dismantle his life piece by piece. As she stepped out into the cool night air, she heard the distant sound of sirens. The police were coming to rescue the woman who had already saved herself. Maya walked down the mountain path, the burner phone ringing in her pocket. It was her brother, the one person Julian thought she had cut off. "Is it done?" he asked. Maya looked back at the fortress on the hill, now glowing red with the house's emergency lights. "It's done," she said. "He's right where he belongs." She got into a waiting car, the engine purring like a satisfied predator. She had been trapped for 3 years, but in a single night she had outplayed the master. The cage was empty, and for the first time in her life, the horizon was wide open. As the car sped away, Maya scrolled through the final confirmation messages on her tablet. Every piece of his empire was crumbling. The luxury cars were being repossessed. The offshore accounts were being frozen, and his reputation, the thing he valued most, was being systematically shredded across every major news outlet. He had tried to steal her identity, so she had simply erased his. By the time the sun rose, Julian wouldn't just be a criminal. He would be a ghost. The journey to the city was quiet. Maya watched the world go by, feeling the weight of the last few years lifting off her shoulders. She thought about the library, the glass case, and the ancient dagger. Julian had thought it was a symbol of power, but Maya knew the truth. Power isn't something you hold in your hand. It's something you hold in your mind. He had trapped her body, but he could never capture her will. And that was his greatest mistake. He had invited a wolf into his home and treated it like a pet. When she finally reached the safe house, her team was waiting. They were a group of women Julian had discarded over the years, former assistants, ex-business partners, people he thought were too broken to fight back. They looked at Maya with a silent, profound respect. She handed the tablet to the lead investigator. "Everything is there," she said. "Every login, every transfer, every threat." The justice that followed wasn't just for her. It was for everyone Julian had ever stepped on to build his throne. The trial was a media circus, but Maya never broke her composure. She sat in the witness stand, looking Julian directly in the eye as his crimes were read aloud. He looked old, defeated, and small. The man who had once loomed like a giant over her, life was now nothing more than a footnote in her story. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, there was no cheer from the crowd, only a heavy, satisfied silence. After the trial, Maya returned to the mountain estate one last time. It was being sold to pay off Julian's debts. She walked through the empty halls, her footsteps echoing against the marble. The smart home was dead, the wires cut, the cameras dark. She stood in the library, looking at the spot where the glass case had been. She realized that the house wasn't a fortress or a prison anymore. It was just a building. She walked out onto the balcony and looked at the ocean. The trap was gone. The game was over. She had outplayed him not by being more cruel, but by being more patient. She had used his own arrogance as the weapon against him. As she turned to leave, she left her wedding ring on the cold stone railing. It was a piece of metal that no longer had any power over her. She was Maya again, not a wife, not a victim, not a pawn. She was the architect of her own life, and the blueprints for her future were hers alone to draw. The story of the woman who outplayed the master of games became a legend in the city, a cautionary tale for those who think they can own another soul. But for Maya, it wasn't a legend. It was simply the day she decided to stop playing by someone else's rules. She drove toward the sunset, the wind in her hair and the road stretching out before her, a long, beautiful line of possibilities. She had been trapped, yes, but in the end, she was the only one who walked away free. Next step. Since I have provided the core, Me 500 words of this 5,000 word vision. Would you like me to expand on the trial scenes in massive detail? Or should I go back and write the missing week? Inside the house where she does the secret hacking? Tell me which part to zoom in on next.